Welcome to this dialogue between Dr. Scilla Elworthy and Thomas Hübl. I'll introduce each of them and then we'll go straight into the dialogue. So Dr. Scilla Elworthy founded the Oxford Research Group in 1982 to develop dialogue with nuclear weapons decision makers. She set up Peace Direct in 2002 to support local peace builders in conflict areas all around the world. She's been 3 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She was awarded the Niwano Peace Prize in 2003. She advised Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Sir Richard Branson in setting up the Elders. She co-founded Rising Women, Rising World in 2013. Her latest book is called Pioneering the Possible, Awakened Leadership for a World That Works. And her TED Talk on nonviolence has been viewed by over 1 million people. So welcome, Scilla. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you.
And so Thomas Hübl is a spiritual teacher whose work is reaching far and wide internationally. He is bringing the fire of the timeless mystical traditions into a contemporary setting. And his work has helped thousands of people through trainings, workshops, retreats, and so on. A core part of his work is that he is deeply engaged with healing, both on an individual level and more on a collective level. And his work has a particularly strong emphasis on both accessing the highest parts of ourselves and also the most wounded, traumatized parts as well. And in the Pocket Project, he is interested in developing networks worldwide who will learn how to work with the effects of collective trauma and indeed set up preventative fields as well. And Scilla, I'd love to ask you to begin by just talking about some of the effects that you've witnessed. I know you've been in many very difficult areas of the world, so how you would describe some of the effects of war, of conflict, of the atrocities in the areas you've been in, what are the effects you see in people, but also in the communities that you've worked in?
The effects can and do last psychologically, physically, and spiritually for at least 3 generations. So before anybody starts a war, they ought to be aware of the havoc that they're making, not just in the present. For example, just to give you what could be quite a minor example, I was in Bosnia at the time of the Bosnian Serb war, and a man had been shot through the eye by a sniper's bullet. So 1 fraction of a second when that sniper squeezed the trigger, that not only made the man blind, but it meant that his family were destitute because he could no longer pursue his trade, which was as a baker. And his children obviously entirely missed their childhood with him. But the entire trajectory of his life was blown up by that 1 millisecond of that action. Now, if you multiply that 1 billion times, you get some idea of what the effect of war is. I just give another more widespread one, but again on the physical level, women in the Congo are raped methodically as a weapon of war. And they're not only raped by the colliding militias, by the members of the militias on either side, sometimes by both sides, but there's a terrible thing that follows the rape, and it can be a multiple rape, in that the men deliberately insert knives or sharp sticks into the vagina of the woman they raped and pull it out sharply, thereby splitting the wall of the vagina. So this means that the woman will be leaking excreta for the rest of her life, not to mention the havoc that will take place when she tries to give birth. So that is a deliberate intention to leave a trail of harm and suffering and misery in a war situation. And it's widespread. They reckon that at least 100,000 women in the Congo have been raped in that way. So I'm sorry to be so graphic, but we can't really pussyfoot around how bad this is.
Mm. And can you say something about, it's very vivid what you're saying, like what is the lasting psychological effect? How would you describe that?
I think it's so many things, but it's a total lack of trust. It's the bottom falling out of any feeling that other human beings can behave kindly and gently. It's the fear that inhabits not just the sleeping moments, but all the daytime moments as well. And if we think of what's happening in Aleppo as we're speaking right here, right now, that's more than 200,000 people surrounded, unable to escape, and being systematically bombed. None of the hospitals are functioning, they've all been bombed. So when a child is crushed under the rubble and pulled out, there's nowhere to take that broken child or adult. So the bitterness that is ensuing in all the people I talked to from Syria is, and the bitterness is that the international community, so-called, hasn't found a way to stop it. At the same time, war draws out of people fantastic heroism. In exactly the same situation of Aleppo, you have these men called the White Helmets, and women, who, whenever the bombs fall, and these are bombs containing chlorine, namely nerve gas, when the bombs are falling, these men drive their rickety ambulances towards where the bombs have fell, where everybody else is running away. And they risk their lives, and 121 of them at least have been killed doing this. So they volunteer. These are people from all kinds of background, bakers, airline pilots, mothers, fathers, people of all kinds just volunteer to do this service to people who are being crushed under the rubble. And so the fineness that emerges, the unbelievable courage of people under this kind of horrific bombardment and duress day by day. It's extraordinary what the human being, the human soul is capable of. Utterly amazing. It leaves me in awe.
I know they were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, the White Helmets.
And they won the alternative Nobel Peace Prize.
Thomas, did you want to comment or say something?
One thing that I want to say is that I think it's, when I listen to you, Scilla, I think one thing it is, and I'm grateful for kind of the intensity of your sharing, because I feel that one of the most important things is that it really matters to us, what you said right now. I think one of the big things of our time is the indifference and the shutdown the emotionally dissociated quality of how we are not participating in it. And I think while you share, and if I just witness what happens inside of me, and if I really let your words go in, I feel a lot. And I think I experience often that those kind of topics are kind of labeled as negative news. They are labeled as difficult, as challenging, and then we might turn away in our life from it and say, okay, that's too much. I have so many things to do in my own life. I cannot, or I don't want to deal with it, or I don't want to be bothered by that, because anyway, I have so much in my life. And I think that's exactly the reason why so few people really see what's happening. And I think therefore I'm grateful that you, even if it sounds very intense what you're saying, I think it's a great example of the fact that if I just intellectually hear what you say, but if I cannot follow you emotionally and with my body perception, if I cannot really get an impression of what all of that really means and how severe that is, I won't understand what war means, and I won't understand what rape means, and I won't understand what murder means, and I will not understand what the Holocaust means, because I will just cognitively get it, but then I need some moral ideas or morals how to deal with the world today. And so that's the most striking for me, is how I feel when I listen to you, and how severe is the state of our world if we really let it in. And I think just that step, or acknowledging that it's so hard for me to feel it, because the atrocities are so strong, that we at least notice how dissociated we are when we hear those things. And I believe before we do that, there is no solution to it, because we will just recreate it, because we don't care. We cannot really care. How can a mother cares for her child only because of one reason? Because the mother feels the child, and therefore she cares. If not, the mother needs all kinds of books to read how to educate the child. But the healthy version of this is that we feel for each other. And I think that's the most striking for me, before I can talk about anything else, is that how important is in our time to be a witness of our world. Because if I'm not, I'm part of it. I'm part of Aleppo. I'm part of what happens in the Congo. Why? Because I don't turn there, and I don't invest my capacity to witness, to feel, and to be a real witness of the time that I live in. And I know it might sound so simple what I'm saying now, but I believe it's the foundation of any kind of restoration is that. Yeah, so that's my first response to when I listen to you.
Totally with you, Thomas, because what we discover is that people who are willing to walk towards the darkness are in a totally different position to bring about change. Whereas those of us who go, no, that's too horrible, I'm turning the television off. And the television even sanitizes what we see. We don't see what really happens in war. But if people say, no, I can't watch any more serious stuff, then by backing away, it means that darkness will rest there probably in their unconscious, certainly in the unconscious of the world, and won't be met, and the possibility of transformation won't be able to happen. It's the same at the personal level as it is with, for example, the people who are willing to go to the island of Lesbos in Greece and work with the refugees who are sitting there in ex-chicken factories. You can just imagine the smell, with nothing to do all day, for days and days on end, while they wait for their papers. But these are people who've watched members of their family drown on the way. They've watched their children maybe die of cold. And so people are going there to try to help them heal in bringing different skills. And that to me is the most wonderful demonstration of how by walking towards horror, we're able to not only change it, but become infinitely stronger ourselves.
And isn't it funny, or not funny, isn't it kind of, how to say this, that all of that's happening right now, and some of the strongest political movements right now are, how can we take care of ourselves? How can we become more nationalistic? How can we become more self-centered? How can we look more at our own wealth? And it's amazing that we live in times where technology gives us access to become a global citizen, to really care. And it has a reason why technology gives us the access, because we have incredibly burning global issues to solve. And we will not go back to a world that we knew back then, because that world doesn't exist anymore. And I think because the signs of our time show us that Syria can be on everybody's mobile phone, which means we have a calling. Life gives us a calling. There's a calling to become a global citizen. And of course we are locally oriented. We live locally, maybe many of us, and we live in a country or we live in a place, and it's great. And it's not about caring just about Syria. It's also caring the same with our neighbor. But I find it very interesting that we see challenges. And that's where I think that the collective trauma is very, very important, because I think in Europe, for example, we see a strong reactivation of the collective trauma field of Europe through the refugees. Now we have two options now. Either we become regressive and go back into our own safety, and that's the way how we deal with it, or we really take the chance and we integrate, we will really work on it, we will become aware of it, and we really move this forward into a healing and a transformation. But what we see currently is more and more the movement, okay, how can I save what I have? And that's interesting when you say many of the atrocities you mentioned and the challenges you mentioned, and also the what it means to walk towards the challenge as a factor of change. And I think we all know that. Why are so many people watching so many of Hollywood movies, so many heroes' journeys, because inside we feel that the journey of the hero is exactly what led somebody walk towards an area where a bomb fell down. But we need to watch it because we don't live it. We don't live up to it. So we need to watch it as a movie. Yeah. And I think that's a very interesting time that so many forces actually pull back into this self-centeredness, and let's look at our own good in the face of technologies, like the mirror image in technology of the suffering of the world. That's a very interesting thing.
I'm with you there, and I'm really glad you mentioned the word hero, because some of the people that I work with are they must be the most courageous people in the world, and yet nobody knows about them. I'll give you one example of Gulila Ismail, and she lives in northwest Pakistan, which is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a woman. And she started when she was 16 to get young girls into school, which is very dangerous. And her colleague, Malala Yousafzai, got shot in the head for doing the same thing, you may remember. Gulilai was completely undaunted by that. She's now 25, And what she does now is to train young men and women to go into the madrasas, that's the religious schools, and identify those young men who are being trained to be jihadis, to be suicide bombers, and to go home with them and discuss with their parents, with them and their parents, why the Quran would not approve of suicide bombing. And so far they've been able to dissuade over 200 potential suicide bombers from carrying out their acts. Now, Gululai's life is under threat every day. People are trying to kill her for doing this. And she has no fear. So to me, this is an incredible example, and I know 10 such people, of the beauty and the grace and the heroism that is taking place all over the world now. We've been able to identify over 1,400 initiatives like this one that I've just described to you. So something is spreading in those areas of very harsh conflict. And I'm very interested in that phenomenon because it's not fully reported yet.
And also I'm also very much interested also with the Pocket Project to research and really find out more, because often we see hot areas, crisis areas, conflict areas as the difficult parts. But actually, what are the functions of life that are growing, the capacities and the qualities, as you mentioned? That's a very interesting thing. So what can we actually learn also from people that live in those areas, and what kind of capacities to develop only in very challenging circumstances? So what are the evolutionary qualities that we learn as humanity through those crisis situations? I think that's a very interesting research field also.
Yeah, you could certainly talk to Gululai. She's very articulate, speaks beautiful English. But there's another thing that's happening, Thomas, which I think is a massive opportunity for the evolution of human consciousness. And that is that we've assumed for the last 10,000 years that war with weapons is necessary. However, the situation we've now created for ourselves in the world is one where the biggest threats coming towards us are absolutely unsusceptible to weaponry. They cannot be dealt with by weaponry, and namely global warming, tides of refugees, and what we're seeing at the moment is nothing to what's going to happen when big cities go underwater. Like Calcutta, London will go underwater. Parts of New York will go underwater. So the migration of refugees is going to be massive. But another of the biggest causes of conflict will be migration. People coming, needing food, needing shelter, and taking it from other people. And then this next big one is the rich-poor gap that we have somehow allowed to happen, where the 62 richest people in the world own more than half the world's population put together. So the 62 multi-billionaires in the world have more money than half the world's population. So that gap is getting bigger all the time, and it's causing so much resentment, envy, and wish to move and get some of that. And then, of course, the last thing is terrorism. And we've seen that trying to deal with terrorism by bombing people is simply counterproductive. So we're moving into an age when we have to develop more intelligent ways of dealing with conflict. And we are learning to do that in ways we don't fully acknowledge and publicize, but we are learning to do that.
And also, like, so like one big function, let's say, of the Pocket project that we established and is to see how, on the one hand, yes, we see the conflicts right now in the world, but also that we learn to look, okay, what is actually, as you said it a bit at the beginning also, what are the traces that a big conflict leaves behind? And we know from trauma therapy that like when a person has experienced kind of abuse or trauma in various circumstances, so there are certain symptoms that that person expresses later on. So we will have more fears in life, we will get agitated very fast, we will have a much shorter range to deal with stress or challenging situations, and so on and so on. So there is a series of symptoms where somebody who is more experienced can immediately recognize, that person most probably experienced the trauma in their life before. And so let's assume that that's something that's not just true for a person, but that's also true for a nation or for different nations. So when nations go through, like, of course, through my work, I experienced this a lot with the German-Israeli Holocaust past, but that's true for many other areas on the planet as well. So how much actually are we already in the recreation of a history of thousands of years of war that are alive in our genes, they're alive in our emotional responses, they're alive in our mental capacities, so they are alive in the relationship capacities, how we can build relationships, and the capacity to resolve conflicts. And so and that's also my question to you, what is the how do you look at the recreation? Because in our work, as you know, in the mystical principles, we often say that the unconscious past is destiny. The conscious past is a possibility. So that either I take the road from behind me and I put it in front of me, and I call it the future, but I just recreate the past, or I illuminate my past, and therefore I have a different option. I have a different choice available. I don't need to recreate the same like before. And I would be curious what your life experience and your expertise, what you would say to what you're saying to this, and maybe you connect this also to parts of your own life experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Thomas. Well, so many young people now are coming up through the internet. When I do public talks all the time, saying, what can I do? I want to be in action. I want to find ways to help prevent and resolve conflict. And there are many, many ways in which they can do that. And I'm setting it all out for them in a great big menu at the moment of what they can do. However, the most important thing they can do is to go into a serious program of self-knowledge, and that is through meditation, through self-inspection, through spending time quietly with themselves or with a good colleague who can help them, to really examine exactly what you're saying, what they are bringing into the future, and examine it and really throw light on it so they become very conscious of it, so that they don't simply unconsciously spew out onto other people their fear and their anger. And I know this because I came into doing nuclear weapons work, trying to get rid of nuclear weapons, motivated by fear and anger. And when I tried to talk to the policymakers, the decision makers on nuclear weapons, I was sending my anger at them. And of course, it didn't work. Why should they talk to me if I'm just going to be angry with them? And I realized that what I need to learn to do was actually to listen. And I think this is the biggest thing that we can all do, is to learn to listen. And we all think we're good listeners, and most of us are not, because we're not listening to you in a way that I could repeat back to you everything you said. Not just that, but the feelings behind it. I'm maybe listening to you thinking, what can I say? Or what's my response? Or how can I argue? Or whatever. So those kind of skills that come with self-knowledge actually help us to alter our own future into something far more productive and useful, but also to change the future for our families.
Beautiful. I love the listening, like what does it mean to be a generous listener?
Yeah.
Like to have enough space and enough ground in oneself to really be a generous listener. Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's one of the key capacities. And it's something, as you said, that many people assume, maybe they might be, but to really go to the more profound levels of listening, when there's a kind of a sophistication in the listening, we get the fine details, we listen in between the lines, and we hear what people really say behind what they say.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic ability. And I think it's very true what you said, that meditation, contemplation, self-exploration, and really illuminating one's own past, so that we even become aware what we don't see and what we don't hear when people speak. I think that's a beautiful function. Yeah,
that's really the way for us to become most useful. And it seems simple, but it's, as we all know, it's deep work. However, I think it's one of the greatest services we can do in conflict work is to be able to listen in this way you just described. Because most conflict, in my experience, is driven by humiliation. And the antidote to humiliation is respect. And the most respect I can give another person is to really listen to them, to give them my full attention, so that anything that they might start to say can come forth, can come out. I can just by listening well, I can actually help somebody heal their trauma. And anybody can do that. Any of us can do that.
And as you said, that like listening, because usually when there are conflict parties in the room or meeting, so one might get triggered very fast by the other, and therefore the spaciousness that can contain and give that respect might be challenged very quickly. And so how important is the function that we establish in ourselves, a deeper consciousness, where even when I feel I get triggered, or when I feel I'm in the room where it's a strong conflict, even to be present as a witness in a room where there's a strong conflict might be very challenging. So I think you're really talking about profound human capacities. This might sound very simple when we talk about it now in a lovely environment, but if you're subject of a conflict, or you are within a conflicted situation, even as a third party, as a mediator, or as a person that works on conflict resolution, I think that there's a lot of wisdom needed to really be a space that can host the conflict, but a consciousness that is bigger than the conflict, but is not disassociated. So we are still participating with our feelings, with our feeling awareness, and we are a bigger space. I think you're talking I want just to underline that you are speaking about the profound human quality.
Well, I found it so useful, Thomas, because when I first started to bring nuclear weapons policymakers together to meet their counterparts from other countries whom they didn't know, and to also meet their informed critics, naturally they were very nervous and they didn't want to kind of take off their mask, and they wanted to assert their point of view. And so after a few tricky experiences, I asked 5 meditators to come and sit in the library, which was underneath the room in which we had the meetings. And I asked these meditators if they would sit there and meditate all day, 5 of them, for 2.5 days. And they agreed. And I called them standing stones, you know, standing stones in a circle. And I didn't know if it was working until on the second day of one of the meetings, a guy from the US State Department took me aside in the room that we were meeting, which was a vaulted, beautiful old room. And he said, "Scilla, this is a very special room." And I said, "Yes, it was built in 1360. And he said, no, this is a very special room." And I said, "Well, people have been meeting here and doing yoga and many nice things for many years." And he said, no, there's something coming up through the floorboards." And I said, "Yes, there it is. Would you like to know what it is?" And he said, "Yes." And I told him, and he went white. And I said, "Well, if you don't believe me, ask those older people who serve you your lunch. It's them meditating." And he kind of looked at me like this. And then he went down to lunch and he came back and he just looked at me and he smiled and he went, and he got it. Now, I know that that was the only way we managed to get real movement in the negotiations and mediation that we were doing, was because of that meditation, without any doubt. So I just mentioned that as an example. But I'm always asking you for, how can we measure this? How can we show that it works? And to me, this was evidence that it was a way of holding the space powerfully enough that people could relax.
Fantastic, beautiful. I think it's such a rich, I mean, you're speaking from such a rich background of life experiences that really underline many of the principles that we are talking about here, but you fill them with real life situations to show, wow, there's really something, because like the mystical knowledge would say, what you did is you infused space. Meditation is space, silence is space, is inner space, is the capacity to witness a process, to not be fully identified with the current process, but to witness like a process of that's happening right now. So we would say a conscious human being is a human being that has an awareness of its own life process. A conscious culture or a conscious group would be a group that has an awareness of the group process. And my sense is the meditation infuses space, and space gives us all the option to have a choice. Because otherwise, my process is on my screen. So there is no choice because I have to act in a certain way. And so I think the beauty of more and more people establishing, as you said before, through meditation, through inner practice, like a base, so that we can really host our emotions and thoughts and body sensations and perceptions of our environment in presence. I think that's such a huge, that's basically our hope also, that because that's where we can be inspired, that's where we have new options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I love your pocket project, because I think it's got such enormous potential. Such enormous potential, and really allowing and enabling the evolution of the human capacity. I love it for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's beautiful for me to talk to you because there's so much richness in what you bring. I think it really connects it to your life with a strong dedication and mission, and I think there's a lot to learn in your life. Yeah,
I think we all have a lot to learn, and it's wonderful when the inner work goes with the outer work, because there's just so many things that people can do now, whether it's in their own home or their community or their school or their workplace. It doesn't have to be, in Syria or somewhere, to introduce concepts like nonviolent communication, like dialogue, like asking your children's school to introduce meditation for children. It's becoming much more widespread now, because the Dalai Lama says that if every child learned to meditate, there would be no war in 30 years. And I believe him. So there's so many things we can do right now, right here. The lovely payback is that when we do these things, we learn more about ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, and also that the many things that you said right now, I think are also like amazing qualities for every one of us to deal with our daily life, as you said. But it's also that those are the capacities that we need in a fast changing culture, society, and global culture. And sometimes it seems there are certain areas on the planet that are safe havens, or they're kind of out of the game of violence. But actually, within a short time, we could see, wow, that's not true. And so, because we are also looking at, okay, what are actually preventive mechanisms? What are ways to reduce the impact of trauma? What is emotional first aid? What can presence do for people that live in crisis areas, in war areas? So how can that consciousness or that presence really contribute to how I deal with such a situation, or if that happens in the country where I live? So what kind of capacities do I have to deal with it, and what can we actually train before we are in a crisis situation, so in case that happens to us, we are more equipped, we have a stronger interior grounding. And as you said before, if and when those bigger challenges will really impact our society, I believe, and that's also what we want to work for in the Pocket Project, is I believe we need a kind of a conscious cultural change force.
Yeah.
Because technology, the technological revolution, will in the next decades overthrow many of the cultural structures that we know. Climate change most probably will do that, and other, as you said, other things. So there will be a huge impact of change onto the life as we know it at the moment. And I think the more people can facilitate such a change and keep it a creative process, keep it a process of, okay, we are moving into something new, how can we move there together? And I think the more we have that in place, and that's also what prevention does when we run into challenges, how can we be equipped that if strong changes happen, we already have some capacities how to deal with it. Because I believe the functions in our consciousness that are inclusive, compassionate, multi-perspective, they like more higher consciousness functions, as we would call it, like a very high development in consciousness to deal with our life. those function, or a strong level of love and compassion and caring for our life around, I think we sometimes might underestimate the pull of a collective regression. What happens in a culture when many people suddenly get very afraid, when many people are afraid for their lives, for not to have enough food, not to have enough whatever, the basic life needs met, so that how fast those higher consciousness functions that we develop in retreat centers somewhere, or in courses and meditation groups, that they are not as stable as we sometimes might think they are when we have good times.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share a bit, if you have something from your life experience, how you see that, how that can get challenged in us, what we believe it's our state of consciousness when life becomes more rough, how stable is that in us?
I think it's very much what many people are talking about in terms of core presence, to train that function within us, that we can stay very present and alert when something very sharp, very scary happens. So, and a lot of that, of course, has to do with being able to breathe in that moment, because if we don't breathe in that moment, we're only using our brain, we're not using the full body, the heart and the belly and everything that's needed in that moment of crisis. And there's a story that moves me so much about a US lieutenant colonel in the Iraq war. And he was leading his troops when you still could have a foot patrol. This was 3 months after the invasion of Iraq. And he was leading his troops on a foot patrol through the streets of Najaf. And all of a sudden, people came out of the houses on both sides of the street, screaming and yelling, furiously angry. And of course, none of the soldiers had a clue what it was about, because they didn't speak Arabic. And so there was a massacre waiting to happen. These heavily armed soldiers and these extremely angry people. And Chris Hughes strode into the middle of it with his weapon pointed at the ground, and he shouted an order at his men that they had never heard before: kneel. And so they kind of wobbled to the ground with their heavy body armor and their helmets and their weapons pointed into the sand. And the whole crowd grew silent and stayed silent for 2 or 3 minutes. And then gradually everybody went home. Now, what that Chris Hughes had was the presence of mind, the presence of heart, the presence of being, to recognize in the instant what could happen. And secondly, he had the wisdom to know that what was needed in this moment was respect. Respect. It did the trick, because something had happened to inflame anger and probably humiliate the people from the houses. And to see these enormously strong, heavily armed American soldiers kneeling. And so that's what I aspire to be present enough to do that. When a knife fight breaks out on the street or whatever.
Yeah, that's what it means, that we have a future. In those situations, if somebody stays in that level of inner presence, there we can impulses or inspirations or insights come in that stay innovative and that are not falling back into past reactions, but come from a different place. I think that's a beautiful kind of fact that happened, and that it shows that what it means that when we are somehow mindful in such a situation, that we can bring in kind of an impulse of the future, basically, that changes the situation. And I think that's what we appreciate so much in all the great spirits that walked this earth in history, that there were always some people that could change situations in an unexpected way and move them around, and somehow not many people expected that to happen. And I wonder what's that function. I think that function needs to be examined, however much we can examine that function, but maybe we can create better circumstances for that to happen more often. I think that are all the genius people. We call them later on, we call them genius. But when they live, I think that was a very good description of moments that are unexpected revelations that can change dramatically circumstances. So same as we see, we can already, on the one hand, we can predict already certain bigger impacts on society, but on the other hand, there are many of the unexpected change moments that nobody can expect, that factor X, that none of us can expect, that is also a player in the game, that we should, the joker, we need to count on.
Yeah. Such a pleasure to talk about this from these different points of view with you. Really deep pleasure for me. I enjoy it.
Yeah, me too, Scilla, me too. I really appreciate this conversation. It's so rich, and I'm so inspired by our conversation. It's beautiful, yeah. So thank you so much, Scilla. It was great. I think it's a beautiful, inspiring impulses that you give us. It's great. Thank you.
And you too, Thomas. Great. It's great leadership. This is what you're doing. Wonderful stuff. Love it.